More Live. Join us as we discuss current events, history, apologetics, and more. We're making education, families, and America great again. Here's Ray.
Well, welcome, and I'm your host today, Ray Moore, and we're glad to be with you. We're still continuing on the topic of how to advance and grow homeschooling. And that's going to be our topic for a while. And it's a very important one. And we're glad to have a special guest today. Am I coming through pretty good? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. All right. And we've got a special guest today with us who is an old hand in homeschooling for many, many years, as I am. We got two old hands in homeschooling today. Ray Moore and Ray Sheen. And Ray Sheen is actually from Greenville, South Carolina, and we've known each other for a few years. We have been in some of the same homeschool associations. There's Ray's biography, and I'm going to take a minute and talk a little bit about it. It's got real outstanding credentials, but he's also a wonderful Christian man and a homeschooler to boot. He's been homeschooling, he and his wife Holly, since 1984. And they have two daughters, and both of the daughters went through homeschooling through, I think, the 12th grade. And then they did college online and homeschooling as well, which is a definite trend among some homeschooling now. And we'll ask him maybe to talk a little bit about that. Ray happens to be a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy and major in engineering. And what, you served 10 years in the Air Force after that?
Yes, sir.
10 years in the Air Force and went to MIT. So both of those are pretty high-powered engineering schools, among the best, if not the best, as far as MIT in the nation. And he's been a leader in homeschooling in the state of South Carolina. He's an author, written a book called Guide to Building Your Business Case. He has a small business, and he's published in the Harvard Business Review as well. So we welcome you today, Ray Sheen, and welcome also to your wonderful wife, Holly, who I'm sure deserves a lot of credit for the success of your homeschooling. The topic today is tactics and projects for homeschoolers to grow the homeschool movement during the COVID-19 crisis. And Ray and I are going to explore this together. He's got ideas of how we need to advance and make homeschooling very successful, more than it is right now. There's probably, Ray, would you guess about 2.5 to 2.8 million children that were being homeschooled before the pandemic crisis came?
That's the number that we typically see being used in media. It may have been slightly larger than that. One of the individuals who's a good friend of mine who does research in this area, Dr. Brian Ray, he heads up the National Home Education Research Institute out of Oregon. He would have put the number at just slightly higher than that, and that's because in many states, there's not a requirement to register or report that you're homeschooling. And we believe that in some of those states, the number that's being reported is a little bit under what is actually happening. But it's still, I would say, between 2.5 and 3 million is the right number.
Yeah, that's the number that I've been using. Of course, the government gives a lower number than that by far. But we know it's been growing before the coronavirus crisis hit the country. Well, what happened when about a month ago, Ray? I've been talking about it on this show, but give us your report.
Well, what happened is that obviously people suddenly found their children at home, and in some cases they thought it was just going to be an extended spring break, an extra week or two, and then it quickly became obvious that many of the schools would not be reopening again, either not at all for this school year or not until sometime in May. And at that point, parents were asked to start doing some of the teaching. or at least being involved in the teaching, depending on the school district. In some cases, the teachers were still trying to get all the kids to log in and come into a virtual classroom. Did not work well in most cases. And so now in most cases, what they're doing is giving assignments to the kids and asking for the parents to help them. And then the kids will still touch base with their public school teacher or private school teacher. Again, it's there's some interesting things that have come out of that. One is that at least definitely in the elementary level, a lot of parents are suddenly realizing that their kids are only getting about an hour or two of real schooling a day. That's all it takes to get through the material. And the rest of the time that the kids were in school was really just all about crowd control. Getting people lined up to go to the bathroom, getting organizing the class so that they can pass papers out and pass papers in, and just the all of the crowd control stuff that goes on in the typical, in particular, elementary school class. You can get through all of the material you need to get through in a day within about an hour or two for most of the kids.
Right. It's amazing, and a lot of parents are finding out that information that you just gave, and also that the system is pretty dysfunctional. One thing that we learned, a lot of the materials that they're getting through the public school is certainly not Christian. It's secular and pagan. In some cases, it's borderline pornographic. And I don't mean in the normal way we think of that term. It's they have a lot of sex ed and some of these kinds of instruction, and it's very explicit and really not appropriate for young children. And some of the parents are having to help their children with their lessons, and they're finding this on computer that's been authorized and recommended by the school. It's kind of shocking. One story we know of is we work with Alex Newman, who is a Christian journalist, and he writes a lot of articles on homeschooling and Christian schooling, and he himself is a homeschool dad. And he was on a very popular conservative radio talk show recently, and I won't name it because the host is a friend of mine, and he is a conservative, the host that is, and he has programs that deal with different topics. He may have one on the danger of the climate control agenda. He may have programs on the Second Amendment, on abortion and marriage, these types of issues. He deals with them all the time. And he has a number of programs that deal with the public school problem and how bad it is. And he kind of recommends homeschooling and Christian schooling himself. Well, we didn't know it, but he was public schooling his kids, but now they're home. And he was talking to his guest, Alex Newman, and complaining about the curriculum that his kids were bringing home, and said how shocked he was. And I told my friend when I heard the story, I said all he needed to do to find out how bad it was is listen to some of his past programs. So this is where a lot of parents are. They're just living in denial. They've got their head in the sand, and they just do not realize what's happening to their children at school. They just send them off and think everything is fine. And now they're finding out the hard way because the curriculum is coming home, and they're bringing this pagan, anti-Christian curriculum right into their living rooms. Are you finding this is a case as well in some of your experience, Ray?
Absolutely. If you look back over the years when I've talked with people about homeschooling, parents who don't homeschool will inevitably give one of three reasons. One reason will be, well, they have to work. Another reason will be they could never teach their kids. They're just not smart enough or don't know enough. And the third is they thought their kids were getting a good education where they were. Well, all three of those have actually been those reasons have been dispelled here with the coronavirus situation. Obviously, as they're looking at the curriculum, they're finding their kids are not getting a good education in many cases. Also, since many parents are now working from home and they're able to work from home, earn their paycheck, still do the work they need to do, and be with their kids, that excuse of, oh, I have to go to work, that one's been significantly reduced by a lot of parents because they're finding they can work from home. And the third one, the one of, oh, they could never possibly teach their kids, again, they're finding they really can. And so a lot of the barriers that have prevented parents from trying homeschooling because they had to work, they were intimidated by the thought, or they were convinced their kids were getting good education, all three of those have now been lowered or eliminated. And so there's a lot more interest and a lot more willingness to discuss homeschooling than I've seen in the past.
Right. And that's what this program is about today. We're going to be eventually getting into some tactics and projects that individual homeschool families might be able to utilize to try to enhance this. Because our dream and passion and belief is that several millions families will stay home in the fall when the coronavirus passes through. And I'm assuming, we don't know for sure, that it'll generally be over by the fall and school will reopen. And that gives us 3 to 5 months to make hay. We've got to really work, as I like to say, like a one-arm wallpaper hanger. We don't have forever to make our case. And over the years, Ray, I'm sure you've experienced what we have. We'll talk to people who are Christians in our churches and in our family and friends who are public schooling their kids. They love the Lord. They believe in Jesus the same way you and I do, but they still are doing it. And you try to urge them not to, and they gave some of the 3 reasons that you just put out on our program here. And so it's very hard to persuade them, but they are not against it. And now they're being forced to do it. And we think that many will hang around in the fall. Do you have any predictions or hopes for that? I know what mine are.
I do think we will see a significant increase in homeschooling. Whether it's a 50%, a doubling, a tripling, there's an interesting statistic that last summer in New York State, the New York State legislature passed a bill that required anyone any child who is going to be in a institutional type school, whether it was public or private, if they were going to an institutional school setting, they were required to have the vaccinations that the state had listed. The state organization in New York saw their membership double within a month's time, and that was because of vaccination. It would not surprise me to see in many states a doubling or tripling of the number of homeschoolers that are now out there because, as we said, the barriers are down. They're finding it's fairly easy to do, and in many families, I'm now also hearing they're starting to enjoy it. They're starting to have some fun.
Mm-hmm. Right.
This is a lot more fun than they ever thought it would be. It's not the kids sitting at the table raising their hand to ask a question and sitting there for 6 hours a day. It's a lot more engaging and fun for the whole family.
And I think the credibility and the belief that the public school system is a strong educational enterprise has really been diminished in the eyes of the public. I've got a family member who is actually nearly my age, and a couple of years ago he was substitute French teacher in a public high school in Aiken, South Carolina. He's very, very gifted and fluent in French, and so he would substitute in this local high school 2 days a week just to get a little extra income. He was semi-retired, and it was to keep his French fresh. And in October, the main French teacher took deathly ill, and he suddenly was begged by the school system to step in and finish out the school year because they couldn't recruit a French teacher at that late hour. So he did. He stepped in and worked a full year as a full-time substitute. And he really liked it. He enjoyed it, and he really kept his French, and he really started loving and caring for the children. He was teaching all upper-level French in the 11th and 12th grade. So he took another year and was hired as a full-time teacher. He got all the benefits that a teacher would get. And I'm getting to a point here. He said, I've never seen a more dysfunctional system than the public school system. And I'm sure it's typical there. He said, I've never seen a system like this that crushes and destroys its workforce. He said the teachers, their morale is terrible. He said there are a lot of young women, even young men, that come into public school teaching. They may not all be Christians, but they're very dedicated. They love children. They want to teach as a profession. And he says after 3 to 5 years, some of them are just crushed and they just leave. And he said there were 2 young women in his school that worked 5 years as public school teachers, and they couldn't take it anymore and left and went to get a job at Walmart. And this is why there's such a huge turnover. We're having a crisis in public education nationally, where they're having to hire teachers in India and overseas, because the Americans don't want to do these jobs because the work environment is so bad. He says that the administration doesn't support the teachers. They beat them up constantly. He says, I had to go home at night and do these computer assignments, reports. It would take me hours to do them. And he says they don't even read them. And he says it's just incredible. And then they do not back up the teachers in discipline. The children are unruly. And it's just, the morale is terrible. So we know that that's true with the teachers, and it's a universal problem. And so the parents are finding out that this is going on, and their children in many cases don't want to go back. So I do agree that we're going to see a real uptick, and we just don't know how big it's going to be, but we pray that it'll be in the even tens of millions. Also, Ray, I mean, get your opinion on this. I think it could create a growth in private Christian schools as well. We're basically talking about homeschooling today, but what is your thought on that? When people go back, they may elect to go to a Christian school.
I do think that that will still be a strong alternative, in particular for parents who they do have to go to a job where they have to go into work. They're on a manufacturing assembly line. You can't do that from home very easily, and so they'll say we still need to find an institutional school system for our children, but they will be very disillusioned with what's happening or had been happening in some of the public schools, and so well, I don't want to spend all our time just beating up the public schools.
Sure.
I really want to focus more on how do we encourage the homeschooling, and that's really where I want to make sure people understand that they can, and that's the kinds of stuff I'd like us to focus on if we could.
Okay, well, I that's what I want to do, and I've got a lot of notes here for that.
Okay.
50 million new homeschoolers in America alone. And so what we're doing with the excess mandate and also the Christian Education Initiative is to try to create tactics, strategies, programs that will encourage many of these to continue in the fall. I want to talk a little bit more about Ray Sheen's credentials, because he's really could be one of the leading experts in the country, and certainly in the state of South Carolina. He's a member of many national and even a couple of international homeschool groups. And I'm going to we're going to put these up right now and let him just describe them a little bit. One I want us to look at first is the homeschoolcommunityfoundation.org. And let's see, is that, yeah, there it is. And he's on the board of this. And this has got some of the top homeschool leaders in the nation. Let's hit the button "Who We Are" real quick in the upper left. And this is a fairly new group, isn't it, Ray? About 2 years old.
Well, not even that. We formed this group actually last summer, and in God's providence, He led us to form this at a time where I now think we're positioned to really make a significant difference at this time. A community foundation, if you're not familiar with what a community foundation is, it's a nonprofit organization that will take funds and distribute those to other nonprofits. It's a way for people to invest in one spot to get the the funding then out to many different organizations.
Okay.
And that's what we do. And in the community foundation, as we gather funds, we then can work with organizations, other nonprofits who support homeschooling. Our whole purpose in the Homeschool Community Foundation is to further homeschooling, to promote homeschooling. And so we're in a position now for people who want to say, I don't know what exactly to do with homeschooling, but I want to do something. If they donate to the Homeschool Community Foundation, we are then working with local groups, state groups, local groups, special interest groups to do projects that will promote and encourage homeschooling in whatever area that they would be working with, whether it's working on special needs or with urban youth or in a particular state. And you can designate funds to go to a particular type of ministry or nonprofit. Incidentally, they don't all have to be Christian. They just have to be nonprofit. We are looking to support home education broadly with the Homeschool Community Foundation. All of us on the governing board are Christians, but we, like I said, we're looking to promote it broadly, and through any other nonprofit, we can reach out and encourage whatever projects they have and support those projects.
Okay, scroll back up and you'll see the board, and you'll see Ray Sheen on the right, upper right. All right. All right, there's Ray, and then these are the governing board members. If you can scroll down again, you'll see Sam Sorbo. She's a famous actress.
She's one of our advisory council or donor development council, helping us to identify people that can really provide, help us to reach out to the donor community. We then have another group that does the grant awards part of the organization.
Well, it came along at a great time, and kudos to Ray Sheen for being one of the founding board members. So that's one thing that Ray's doing, and he's right here in Taylor's of Greenville, South Carolina, but he's working nationally with this important new organization, the Homeschool Community Foundation. So just want to point that out to you, and this will help the funding. Now let's look at another group that he's involved in, Global Home Education Exchange, and go back to his bio page. Oh, okay. All right.
Looks like we've got the website up there. Yes.
All right. Just describe this organization a little bit for us, Ray.
Sure. The Global Home Education Exchange was formed about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was to promote homeschooling on a global basis. The chairman is Gerald Hubner out of Canada. The vice chairman, let's see, I forget who it is right now. At any rate, the board of directors are representing countries all over the world. And primarily what we've been doing so far is holding global conferences. The first conference we had was in Berlin. The second one we had was in Rio de Janeiro. Third one was in Russia, where we actually split it, half in St. Petersburg, half in Moscow. We were scheduled to be doing one here shortly in the Philippines, but that has been postponed because of the coronavirus issue. So we'll probably be doing that in the spring now. And what we do in these is typically what we're doing is in the local region, we're really focused on helping from a legal standpoint and to move laws forward or to influence public policy people. And that's often why we select the country that we select for the conference. And then as part of the conference, though, it's not just public policy. We try to bring in or at least invite homeschool leaders from around the world and definitely from that area. And we provide a lot of help for them in the terms of how to organize homeschooling in your state, or in your country. What are some of the pros and cons and pitfalls of different ways to run your organization? Providing encouragement also for those leaders in those countries. We found every country we've gone into, it's been a tremendous boost for that country and for some of the nearby countries. The one exception, of course, obviously being Germany, where homeschooling is still illegal, and that's actually why we held the first conference there, was to bring a spotlight on the fact that in Germany it's illegal to teach your children at home. It's one of the few countries in the world where it's illegal. But at any rate, this organization is, we've been developing national organizations in countries all over the world, and providing resources, connections. Often then when they start to have their conferences or their meetings, we provide speakers that go out to work with them, and help them to really get the movement going in their country. We're finding homeschooling is blossoming in many countries. I'll use an example because we recently had the conference there in Russia. Homeschooling is booming in Russia right now, and that's in part because the Russian Orthodox Church has told its members, get the kids out of the public school systems. The public school systems in Russia are still dominated by the communist thinking and communist influences. And so the Russian Orthodox Church is the biggest promoter of home education in Russia.
That is incredible. I knew it was growing, but I hadn't heard that about the Russian Orthodox Church. And that's an incredible thing. And it's also growing in China, as you know. And
right.
We've got outreach in China with the Christian Education Initiative. We've had some of our members have had books. Israel Wayne has had 2 books translated into Mandarin, and they're actually circulating online right now in China. And my wife and I wrote a book some years ago called The Promise of Jonadab, and it's been translated into Mandarin and published in China and selling there. And we're in touch with lots of folk in China who want to homeschool, and there's actually 400 underground Christian schools in China. So I think the Holy Spirit is rebirthing or birthing homeschooling and an interest in Christian education all over the world.
Right.
And so this is and Ray, as I said, he's probably one of the best connected people in my state who is working in many fronts. So we're letting our audience see that there's a lot of new organizations and infrastructure to make homeschooling even bigger than it is now. We like to say that there are 50 million new homeschoolers. But if this virus had come to our culture in 1980, when my wife and I were just beginning to homeschool, we wouldn't have had the organizations and the infrastructure to assimilate and absorb a lot of growth. Would you comment on that?
You're absolutely right. And so let's focus in on the U.S. right now, because that's where the homeschooling movement has been around the longest, and we have the most infrastructure. And one of the things that I would say within the United States, because every state's education law is different, it's really important within the U.S. that if you're looking at homeschooling or thinking about promoting homeschooling, you have one of the state organizations. The way we homeschool here in South Carolina from a legal standpoint is very different than just Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, any of the neighboring states, and that's true all around the country. Every state law is different. And back to the global home education for just a second, in many cases, there's a national education law. And so they're dealing with home education at a national level. We don't do that in the United States. In the United States, home education is a state level, and that's why it's so important that we promote and encourage those state organizations. The state organizations are the ones that act as a watchdog of what's happening in the state legislatures, because the state legislature, since that's where the education laws are being formed and that's where they're run from, we're always seeing let's just call them attacks on the home education, the Institute of Home Education in the state legislatures. So we're watching in each of the states. The state organizations are doing that. In addition, the state organizations are normally connected with all of the co-ops and local support groups and other groups within their state. So if you contacted your state organization, they'd be able to tell you, oh, in the city you live in, there's 4 co-ops, and here's the people to contact them, or here's some of the other organizations or groups. Some of the state organizations, I'll use SCAES, for instance, in South Carolina. SCAES is the South Carolina Association of Independent Home Schools. We provide counseling and encouragement, support for parents. Many organizations will do something similar to that, the ways of how to get started. Some of them will host resource centers or conventions, curriculum fairs, places where homeschool parents can get together to look at what's out there, listen to speakers, understand what are the tools and curriculum and facilities that are available to them so that they can tailor their program, their child's program, to what meets their child's needs and fits their family lifestyle.
Okay, good. Let's put up SCAES. Forgot to mention that earlier. That's the South Carolina Association of Independent Home Schools. And my wife and I were actually members of it years ago when our children were being homeschooled. Now we've got 4 adult children, ages 49, 43, 41, and 37. So we've kind of outgrown homeschooling at that level, but our grandchildren were homeschooled for a time. And now, since my daughter-in-law was hired to teach at Ben Lippen, they've had to put the children in the Christian school. Put up SCAES, and I was a member of this when we were homeschooling. Ray's been a member, but Ray's also on the board. And this is okay.
I was going to say, it's interesting. I'm on the board of SCAES. We never homeschooled with SCAES because by the time we moved to South Carolina, our kids had graduated from high school, homeschool high school. I was on the board of, in fact, I was president of the Connecticut equivalent to SCAES. That was called Teach of Connecticut. And I was on the board when we lived in Iowa of the Iowa State Homeschool Organization, Niche of Iowa.
We know them.
And what was helping to form the original state organization up in Pennsylvania. When we lived in Pennsylvania, that's when the home education law was passed there. The legislator who was the sponsor of that bill went to church with us, and we worked with him, helped get the bill in place, helped get things organized and going there in Pennsylvania. We actually have homeschooled in 4 different states, South Carolina not being one of them.
Oh, okay.
We started our homeschooling in California, then went to Pennsylvania and Connecticut and Iowa, and then back to Connecticut again. So we homeschooled in many different states and have seen lots of different state laws because of that. That's why I feel it's so important that you connect with the state organization, because that's where you really understand what's happening locally for you and what's going to impact how your homeschool needs to operate or will operate to I don't encourage people to violate the law. I think because it's now legal in every state, you can easily homeschool legally. So do so. There's no need to. At one time, you would be incarcerated for homeschooling. That was back in the 70s and 80s in many states where it was illegal. Not the case now. So there's no reason not to just abide by the law. It's not going to be it's not going to be onerous for you, and it's a good testimony in the community.
Well, South Carolina was birthed in a period of controversy. At one time, SCAES, this group was birthed. We had more litigation for a period of time in South Carolina, all 50 states combined, I believe. And so we sued, and Zan Tyler and her husband and a couple other couples were plaintiffs in that suit, and we won at the state Supreme Court level. So then the legislature, I think, been a long time got some of the details, you might be able to tell me better. We formed this group, and we were members, and it was one of the first ones of its kind. Back in around 1990, I think it happened. And so Ray's on the board. You may want to refresh me a little bit on that history, because I was around when it happened. We were actually members right after that.
You've got it pretty accurate, and that we are coming up. This is the 30th year anniversary, our 30th year for SCAES, and it like actually in many states, it formed because of a legal crisis, a legal battle. When we were in Connecticut, we were in the middle of a legal battle, and that's what formed Teach in Connecticut. When we were in Iowa, the Iowa organization was formed out of having forced through a law there, and that then created the Iowa organization Niche. And so that's been true in almost every state. Different states, different time period, just depending upon when it hit there. Actually, California was one of the very first states to work through and get a good, a decent system in place. And that's we feel very blessed that I was that time I was in the Air Force, and we were transferred to California just as we were starting to homeschool, and that state had probably the most advanced homeschooling movement at any point in time. So we were able to quickly plug in and meet other homeschoolers, get to know those, and then start getting involved in leadership in our region within California. So it's been a big a growing movement for many years because back in the 80s and 90s, those legal battles which started most of the state organizations.
Well, Ray's been involved in, like I said, a number of these major organizations to grow, advance, and to nurture homeschooling. And then I didn't know he'd been involved in so many different states as well. But he's been a successful father and husband and homeschooled 2 daughters. And I got to know him initially through the columns. He and his family, his daughters too, would write a regular column on homeschooling in the Times-Examiner, which is a small Christian newspaper in the upstate area. And I've been a reader and actually a writer for it as well over the years. And my first little pamphlet that I wrote, Let My Children Go. I've told you about this many times. Here's a copy of it. It was my vision for the Exodus Mandate, and I wrote that and published it in 1995.
Wow.
And it was initially published in the Times-Examiner. And it was just a local idea of growing Christian education and homeschooling in the state of South Carolina. Well, 2 years later, I launched as a national movement. And, we're just part of a mix of dozens, if not probably by this time, hundreds of similar ministries. But we played our role. And so I wrote for the Times-Examiner too, just like Ray and his daughters have. And they've done a wonderful job, and they've kept homeschooling before thousands of Christian families, particularly in the state of South Carolina and the upstate. So thank you for that. And that's how I first got to know about him and his family. All right, let's take a look at
to that point, if I can, Ray, for just a moment. Many of those articles that we wrote over the years for Times-Examiner and for other state organizations, because we've written and spoken at conferences, we have compiled those into a blog called homeschoolfamilyforum.com.
Right.
And homeschoolfamilyforum.com is a great place if people want to go take a look at those and just pull any articles. And quite frankly, we encourage people to link to those, to pull up any article you want, to republish them if you'd like. There's a lot of perspective, both as a home educator, as a parent, and a homeschooled student, as my daughters wrote. As you mentioned, they've written many of those. And so I'd encourage anybody who wants to go see the Homeschool Family Forum.
Okay, well, put that. Oh, great. You got that up. I was always a reader. I didn't always let Ray know that I was reading it, but I read that newspaper. It's a weekly, but it has a real loyal following in the state of South Carolina, and I understand 700 to 800 people out of state get it because it tailors to our community.
Right.
And so this family is a worthy family for our audience to go, because they've covered all the different nuances of homeschooling as a way of life. And it's really more about a way of life as it is about schooling. In some ways, homeschooling, the word schooling is kind of an unfortunate term. It's not wrong, but it's not adequate. I think we could be looking at call it discipleship or biblical parenting. There's a lot of other terms, home education, but we've kind of got labeled as homeschoolers, and it's probably not going to be able to undo it. But it's really more than just schooling, isn't it, Ray?
Absolutely. When people ask me to describe it, I use the phrase, it's home-based, parent-led Christian discipleship education.
Right.
That's a big mouthful, but it is based in the home, although it isn't only in the home. We did lots of field trips, and a lot of people do a lot of field trip or out in the community activities. It's parent-led, and so that distinguishes it from some other forms of of education. And one of the reasons why you want parent-led is the parents really know the child the best. They understand that they have that loving concern and are really the best equipped to understand what's happening with the child and to take advantage of those, as we hear, teachable moments. As Christians, we do believe that all of our education should be grounded in the Bible, grounded in the Word of God. So Christian discipleship, education. And I mention both those because I believe that the character building is equally important with the academic growth. We're not just trying to get people who are smart. We're trying to grow mature men and women with strong Christian character, ready to lead in their family, their community, and even broader as the Lord leads them.
How old are your daughters now?
One daughter is 43, the other is 40.
Okay, wow, I didn't realize. Okay, so they're about the age of my kids, and
right.
I know, and they were quite accomplished young women themselves. Let's put up one text. I didn't have a Bible lesson today, but I can't have these programs without at least looking at one text. And let's look up John 4:9-4. And we put this up a couple times recently because we believe we're in an urgent moment here for our movement, the homeschool movement, to really make a lot out of the time we're in, the 3 to 5 months, to really reach out to our fellow Christians and try to urge them to stay with it. And I think one of the most important decisions, the big decision, John 9:4, the big decision has been made already to leave and go home. But a lot of them may have a tendency to go back in the fall. And Jesus here uses this word to talk about urgency. I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day, for the night comes when no man can work. And he's letting us know that we have a urgent moment in time, all of us, to make our mark for the kingdom of God and make our mark for Christ. And in this case, to make a mark with our children and homeschooling and reaching out to our fellow Christians. So we're in an urgent moment because this window or door will close somewhat in the fall, assuming we go back to school. Now, meaning we can continue to work, but we've got a captive audience. And Ray mentioned that he's working globally, and we are too, to a lesser degree. And there are 50 million new homeschoolers in the United States. Now, we don't call them their public school at home, but worldwide it's about 1.37 billion. And I think that may include some higher ed. So this is a worldwide movement, and it's not just the USA. All right, let's look at, we want to talk in the time remaining about some tactics and things that local families can do.
Sure.
And I want to put up, and I sent this to you earlier, Coles County, Illinois. This is something that just came to my attention recently. Put that up real quick, Jared. We're just going to talk about it briefly. Coles County, Illinois. All right, this is this is what a local homeschool family did. Coles County is southeast Illinois and Charleston, Illinois, downstate. It's also the home of East Illinois University. It's not a large county, only about 50,000 people in the county, somewhat of a rural county. And this lady you see here with the two daughters is a very dedicated Christian homeschooler in Coles County, Illinois. And they just went on, many counties and cities will have their own like separate Facebook page. I don't know, it's a community service. And they went and spent $6.30, I think it was, to buy this ad on the Facebook page in Coles County. And apparently a lot of people go to the Facebook County Facebook for what's going on in the community. And it was shocking in a good way with the response to this ad. And they just were saying, we're happy and look at, don't send them back in the fall. And this is a homeschool family. And they had an overwhelming, strong response. And you can see some of the data on the right side of the page. After one day, they had 524 people tapped on it. And they had about 25 likes and 25 loves. Now, I got a report from my friend yesterday, and he said, Ray, it's now gone to 2,700 families opened it in the county. Now, remember, there's only 50,000 people in the county. And this family, this couple, they're being contacted for help to how to keep going in homeschooling. Scroll on down and see the next part of it. Jared, can you scroll down? I think, yeah. And these are the ads they're running. So they're gonna invest $50, Ray. Not very much, is it?
Right.
To try to reach their county. And the point we're making here is that we think a tactic like this, a local family, this could be done all over the country. Thousands of homeschool families in your neighborhood, in your county, could invest in ads on Facebook and reach out to hundreds, if not thousands, of people in their community who are right now struggling with what am I going to do in the fall? And they don't know anybody in the homeschool movement. They maybe have heard of it, but they don't know what to do. They don't know what curriculum to choose. So a lot of what we have to do, Ray and I and the people that we're associated with, we've got to reach out and encourage them that they can actually do it. And
right.
this family, I think, is going to spend $50 now and keep it going in Coles County, Illinois. And I just pass that on as one idea or a tactic or project. You have any thoughts on that, Ray?
Well, it's a great way. It's a great tactic, a way of encouraging people and connecting with people. Let me throw a couple others out that are out there. There are now several different online homeschool conferences or conventions, people sponsoring those. There's one that's going on actually right now. It is sponsored by the Colorado State Organization, but if you sign up and you provide your address, the Colorado will send that address to the state organization from whatever state that you're from, so that they can then do follow-up with you to help you. And in those, you can hear from different speakers and on topics about how to homeschool high school, how to teach math, the impact on just your family, how to organize your day. Lots of different topics, plus it gives you connection into many different curriculum providers.
Right.
That's one technique, or one thing. Another technique or another help that's out there, homeeducator.com. This was it's a site that was created by the Texas State Organization, which once again, as they get people, as people sign up, they pass the information out to the other states. And here they just go through the basics of what do you do to set up your school, how do you get going. Something we have right now, just again a way of encouraging and helping here in South Carolina. We've got a little a COVID memory book. A COVID virus memory book that at an elementary level and a high school level, if you contact SCAES, we can send that memory book to you. And it's just a way with your kids to talk about what was going on during this during these couple of months, and what are some of the things happening in our family, in our community, and it's just a way of engaging and talking. And the great thing about something like that is it also gives the kids a chance to write, to be creative, but also check their grammar, their spelling. You can you turn it into a unit study where they're now we go back. In fact, the high school version goes back and looks at the Spanish flu from 100 years ago, so it brings in history and literature. So it's just a great way to combine all that and turn that into a school exercise. And my point is that there's lots of these kinds of tools and techniques, ways to reach out to help people. And I think any of them are good. If you connect with someone, that's what makes a difference. Once you've connected, then people have someone they can talk to. I mean, even in, I'll use in our local church, we created a network so that families who are suddenly homeschooling and are struggling a little bit, uncomfortable a little bit, some of the experienced homeschool families have offered a buddy system to come alongside and ask me questions. If things aren't going well in something, we'll help you with that, or we'll tell you how we did it or are doing it with our kids.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a great idea. I wrote that down, the buddy system, and because right now there's 6 million homeschool alumni That would include ones that are doing it now, and then ones that did do it, and they could be like consultants.
Absolutely.
And see, I think the big decision has been made to leave. Now, they didn't want to leave, many of them, but they did leave. So now the next big decision is weaning them off of a pagan anti-Christian curriculum, which is a public school curriculum, and getting them to adopt one of the Christian curriculum. And then when they do that, they'll have a tendency not to go back. These are all great ideas. A couple of others we could throw out here is you could, this is not so personal, but you could call in talk shows. A lot of the Christian stations and radio programs around the nation. And if you're local, you could call in and get on the talk show and talk about your experience.
Right.
You could do radio interviews yourself right up there in Greenville. We've got a couple of big radio programs, and Word Radio and the Christian station there. I can't remember their call numbers, but you can get on there, Ray, and I hope you'll do it since you're right up in that area. You can write letters to the editor or do op-eds, and that's what Ray and his daughters were doing for years. They had a regular column in the upstate Christian newspaper, and I'm sure it was read by thousands. The group in Colorado, that's Kevin Swanson's Generations, right?
No, I'm talking about the state organization, which is Colorado Home Educators of the Christian Home Educators of Colorado. Check.
Yeah, right. I think he was a founder of that, or used to be affiliated with it.
He was the president at one time. He wasn't the founder, but he was the president at one time.
Yeah, we know him, and we know that group as well. We've always we've had a booth there for the last few years. Whenever they meet, we show up.
Kevin's a great man. I worked with Kevin from time to time, and he's a godly man and with a great vision.
All right, let's see. I guess we're kind of wrapping up here. We still have about 5 minutes. Give us some more insight, Ray, and what needs to happen here in the next 3 to 5 months.
Well, what needs to happen is that every one of those families who are homeschooling, or rather, right now I'll call it they're schooling at home. I wouldn't really put them all the way to homeschooling, but who are schooling at home
for the first time.
For the first time, if they're in your church, we need to. Someone needs to talk with them. An experienced homeschooler needs to sit down and really help answer their questions, get over any other barriers or challenges or just insecurities that they have. And that's what I found is when you make that connection and people see that they can do it, they quickly find that they love it. It is a lifestyle, but it's a lifestyle that's a very enjoyable, wonderful lifestyle. You get to know your kids. The family is stronger. There's tremendous benefits. But for people to have the confidence to go forward, they probably need someone holding their hand. And that's where we need to get that connection, whether it's your church, a local group, a state group, someone to hold their hand. And that's this example you had from Illinois in Cole County. People are contacting them because they want somebody to hold their hand. And that's where, once again, if you go to the state groups, if you go to the co-ops, the co-ops are a little bit iffy right now because they can't meet either. And so that's so many of them are sitting dormant. That's why in particular I'm encouraging going to the state groups, because they're still alive and kicking and doing well. They focus on communication and information sharing and like I said, the getting started workshops, things of that nature. Work with them and you get each of those families to connect with them so that they have a personal tie. If someone wants to really do something on a larger national basis, well, then that's the time to contact the Community Foundation, the Homeschool Community Foundation, because that's the venue that we can reach across the country. We can have a movement that's going everywhere and not be local. So that's really what I think is your best vehicle for a national impact.
And then, of course, the global Home Education Exchange is a worldwide group.
Right.
So we're just so privileged and honored to have Ray Sheen today. He's not a theoretical guy, even though he's very good on that, because he's a practical man. He's been doing this since 1984. He's been a successful husband and has a successful family and homeschooled his own children, and they're doing well. And so he's proven and field tested all the things that he's advocating. And now he and we like to think ourselves, I'm 76, we're kind of coming into our golden moments, and our movement is really coming of age, and we think we're headed for a major breakout time, and it's happening right now. John 9:4. The night is coming, work while it's today, because the night is coming when no one can work. So we have our work cut out, and this is an exciting moment to be alive. And finally, I'll make one closing comment. One of my supporters in the state of Washington homeschooled her children. She and her husband are about our age, so they've been around a while, been married nearly 50 years, and homeschooled her children who are adults now, and their grandchildren are being homeschooled. And so the other day, when this was happening, when the schools closed and everybody went home, the 11-year-old daughter said, Grandmommy, is this a revival that we've been praying for? So we don't know. We're seeing change. We're seeing a big moment happen. But my prayer is that there'll be tens of millions of new homeschoolers as a result of this moment in time. Ray, we're so honored and thankful that you are with us. And let's see, we want to say, put up the Homeschool Family Forum one more time, because this is how you can connect with him in the future.
Right.
Homeschoolfamilyforum.com. Jared, you can put that up. That's his blog. All right, great. Homeschoolfamilyforum.com. Okay, let's close in prayer. Father God, we just thank you for your love and mercy and grace in our lives, and revealing your son Jesus to us, and giving us the forgiveness of sin, purpose in life, and a skip in our step, and a home in heaven in the future. Thank you. You've given us works and projects and things to do for your kingdom right now. We thank you for Ray and Holly Sheen and how you've raised them up, and for all the good work that they're doing to advance your kingdom through homeschooling. And we'll praise you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. This is my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Okay. Bye now, Ray.